Thank you, Rabbi Shore, and a big yesher koach to Rabbi Shore and to all the OU staff for putting together such a beautiful evening of Torah. The schus of our Torah, of course, should serve as protection for our chayalim and for the chatufim and for all the people who need refuah shlema. Yirmiyah begins Sefer Eicha, the sefer in which he describes the dreariness and the sadness of Yerushalayim as it's destroyed and lay in ruins. He begins it with a very strange word, a word that hardly appears throughout Tanakh. It's an iconic word. It becomes, of course, not just the title of the Megillah, but one of the catchwords of Tisha B'Av. Eicha. Eicha yashva badad. The word Eicha, of course, absorbs multiple meanings. That's why he chooses the word. At its root, it stems from the word Eich, and it's an inquisitive word. And it introduces a description. How do you get somewhere? Here are the directions. How do you bake a cake? Here are the instructions. How do you put together something you bought in the store? Here is the manual. So Eicha yashva badad here basiyam, and the next 4.5 prakim detail how the city, which was once bustling, once was the center of humanity, the metropolis of the ancient era, became so desolate and quiet. So at its root, it's an inquisitive Eicha. How did it happen? Here's the description. Chazal had two additional meanings. It's not inquisitive, it's more declarative. He isn't inquiring and then beginning the description. He's rather declaring. What is he declaring? So the Medrash says, source number 1, it's acknowledging guilt, acknowledging culpability, accepting responsibility, which is interesting because it seems as if, at least in Bavel, the first person to accept responsibility was Daniel, at least publicly. Daniel finally says, after davening and wondering and questioning, says, L'cha Hashem atzdaka v'laro boshes haparim. So Daniel seems to be the first to accept responsibility, but Yirmiyah is already hinting at it, Eicha, acknowledging, accepting, bearing guilt. According to the second day in Chazal, it's not a lashon tochacha. Rabbi Nechemiah Omer, en lashon Eicha elakina. It begins the suffering, the sadness, the indulgence in sadness. Gemara says in Ksuvos that when Rabbi Yehuda Anasi passed away, they issued a decree that Kol HaOmer Rebbe Meis Yidakar B'charav. It's Ksuvos Daf Kuf Daled. Anyone that says that Rebbe died should be stabbed. If we make believe Rebbe's still alive, we'll resuscitate him. If we just don't mention that he died, he'll leap to life. But everything described becomes more vivid. Everything thought is much more vague and distant. When we describe something, we clothe it with words, it creates more compelling, more emotional response. So we all knew the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, but Yirmiyah walks through the streets of Yerushalayim, witnesses the scenes of ruins and destruction and punishment and persecution, and begins to describe it. And as he processes what he's about to describe, he feels the kinna and he mourns and he sobs. So the second layer of Eicha is not inquisitive, how did it happen, and here's the list. But the second layer of Eicha is either a tochacha or a kina, and it is important, I find, that sometimes, because mourning, not maybe for Israelis, because we've suffered so much and we're all in mourning, but at least before the war, and maybe for people who are not as engrossed in the war, it's very easy to transform Tisha B'Av into Yom Kippur. And Tisha B'Av is not Yom Kippur. Tisha B'Av is not a day for tshuva. Tisha B'Av is not a day for vidoy. Tisha B'Av is not a day. The end of the day, maybe. But the beginning of the day is a day of Avelos. And could you imagine standing at a grave, and the second the person, or you, Chas v'Shalom, suffers the tragedy, you immediately transform it, well, how should I improve my life? And what are the messages I should take away? And I have to perform tshuva. That'd be grossly inhuman. There are people suffering, there's a death, there's a human being, you mourn, you cry, as Yirmiyah says, Yeshev badad v'yidom kinatal alav, you sit quietly in the corner because your crown has been taken, Yasim yitem b'afar piu, put dust into your mouth, ula yesh tikva. So the minhag is, once the Avelos subsides, chatzos, so then we turn our attention a little more to tshuva. But even then, it's not a day for slichos, it's not a day of tefillah. Gam ki azak v'ashaveh sasam tefillah, see the Gemara says, the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, there's a chomas barzel, an iron curtain that separates, and davening, as if nothing happened with the Beis HaMikdash destroying, ignores that reality. Business is normal, we daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Tisha B'Av. So it's important to carve out a space for mourning that doesn't immediately bleed into, how can I improve, and what's the tshuva? That will come a month later on Yom Kippur, or 2 months later, in Mir Hashem and Yom Kippur. But there's an interesting medrash which implies a third meaning to Eicha, and that's the meaning I want to speak about tonight. Medrash says that 3 Nevi'im employ the word Eicha. Yirmiyah, the beginning of Sefer Eicha. Yeshaya, Daf Torah. Eicha, Haisa Lezana, Kirya Ne'emana. And Moshe Rabbeinu, Parshas Devarim, Eicha Salvadi, Tarchachem Asachem Vrivchem. Now, in those other instances, Moshe doesn't really describe. He's not inquiring to begin an answer. He doesn't describe. He's explaining something. He's certainly not suffering Moshe. There's no avelus. There's no tochacha. When Yeshaya describes the city that has become a den of prostitution and of corruption and of immoral behavior, he doesn't describe it. It's a one-off sentence. Chazal say, source number 2. Shlosha nisnabu b'lashon Eicha. Moshe, Yeshaya, v'Yirmiyah. Moshe amar Eicha asel v'adi tachem asem v'rivchem. Yeshaya amar Eicha asel zana kirya ne'emana. Yirmiyah amar Eicha yeshva badat hi'era b'asiyam. Those Eichas, Moshe's Eicha and Parshas Devarim, he's not describing anything. He's exclaiming something. Evidently, the word Eicha is iconic. It's foundational to Tisha B'Av. It's a gateway to understanding something beyond Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av, part of the challenge of Tisha B'Av is not myopic or myopia. Sometimes we develop myopia about the Churban Beis HaMikdash. I encourage people, for example, to split Tisha B'Av into Churban and Galus. Churban is to experience what happened during the Beis HaMikdash, the first Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash. Galus is the aftermath of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, and we suffer that on Tisha B'Av. And of course, we relive some of those moments during the Kinos, but you can't just take snapshots of the Holocaust and of 1666 and of the Crusaders. It has to be a thorough panoramic view. What did we suffer over the last 2,000 years? What was taken from us? How was Jewish history reoriented? So there's something deeper. Tisha B'Av is a day of Jewish history. It's a day to walk into some tunnel of the last 2,000 years that shouldn't have ever occurred. And now that we're slowly walking out of that tunnel, to look back at that tunnel and to appreciate what we've suffered, just as there's a little bit of a smile, and hopefully tonight we'll end with a smile. Rabbi Akiva's famous smile, just like it's all right to smile on Tisha B'Av, to recognize the triumph of Jewish history. But to recognize the triumph, you have to suffer the misery of what we've experienced. What is that term Eicha, and why is it so iconic? And how can we decode the meaning of Eicha by the fact that 3 different prophets employed the same term? Well, the Medrash actually distinguishes between the 3 prophets. They didn't just all converge on the same term. They used it at different stages of Jewish history. So now we have a little more work, we have a little more meaning. Moshe employed the term when the Jewish people were successful. They were growing exponentially in the desert. They were asking questions. It's not clear whether this Eicha Salavadi refers to Moshe in Parshas Yisro. We're spending all day and all night answering their questions. Maybe Moshe in Parshas Baloscha. But either way, this is Moshe facing this indomitable task to deal with the needs of a growing, bustling nation that had newly been liberated and was starting to grow physically, nationally, spiritually, and looking for answers. And Moshe just can't solve all the answers. They're looking for spiritual input. And Moshe is wearing himself thin. And Yisrael guides him, at least in Parshas Yisro, to delegate. Yeshaya uses the term binivulam during our moral degradation. Yeshaya does not witness the Churban. Yeshaya walks through Yerushalayim and sees the thieves and sees the zonos and sees the hypocrisy. Remember, the first Beis HaMikdash, essentially there are 3 or 4 chatayim that it can be broken down to, but one of them was hypocrisy, hiding behind ritual. Korbanos, Beis HaMikdash, Heichal Hashem, we have a Kadosh Baruch Hu, we have ritual, we have mitzvos, and underneath it, moral rot, moral decay. Exploiting the weak, taking advantage of the vulnerable, ignoring the widows, ignoring the orphans. It's just hypocrisy. It's over-ritualization, where we check the boxes and we know what we're doing, but it doesn't reflect any inner moral spirit. And Yeshaya witnesses this, and he says, Eicha Hisal Zana, Kiryat Ne'emana. This is mostly the city of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's truth and moral compassion, and it's become a den of lies and a den of exploitation. And then Yirmiyah sees the Jewish people as they've already unraveled B'churbanan, and he uses Eicha. So it's not just incidentally the 3 different Nevi'im chose the same word. They chose it at strategically different points. Moshe at the apex of Jewish success, Yeshaya at the moral degeneration, and Yirmiyah with the calamitous consequences of our moral collapse. What are Chazal striking at? Or of course Chazal are really decoding. Why are all these Nevi'im returning to the word Eicha? Because the word Eicha doesn't just mean an inquisitive how. It also means a rhetorical how. Sometimes when an event happens that you just can't fathom, you're overwhelmed, you're bewildered, it boggles the imagination. Your first response is just exasperation. How could this happen? And the answer is, oh, the person was killed in a car accident, or this is how they're not asking for information. It's a rhetorical how, in the absence of any capacity to lend ration or explanation or reason. How? How does this make sense? Why is this happening to us? And Eicha, it becomes the password for Jewish history because it captures the irrationality of Jewish history. The Jewish history does not conform to typical patterns that govern every other nation in their arc and trajectory. We are compared in Sefer Bereshis to 3 different metaphors because Jewish identity is multi-layered. So one metaphor can't fully encompass Jewish identity. The 3 metaphors in Bereshis are stars, sand, and dust. And sand and dust are different, but that's not for now. But one of the implications of being compared to the stars is we hover above. Stars aren't subjected to the natural forces that affect this earth. I mean, they're held together by gravity, as Einstein proved, but they don't suffer the same gravitational pull. That's why they're fixed in the sky, whereas we're grounded on Earth. So they're not subjected. Stars metaphorically represent something supernal that hovers above, that transcends not just biology, chemistry, but referring to nations, transcends national laws, the laws that govern races, religions, ethnicities, peoples. Our history is like the stars. It's meteoric, it's exponential, it's irrational, it's asymmetrical. And that asymmetry and disproportionality expresses itself at every stage of Jewish experience. When we rise, when we fall, and when we're punished. And all of these Nevi'im were addressing the same phenomena, but from different moments, or at different moments, and from different vantage points. Moshe saw the meteoric rise of a nation that had weeks earlier, assuming this is Israel, been enslaved for 2 centuries. Think about, for example, the African American community who suffered far less than what we suffered in Egypt. I mean, it wasn't complete, it wasn't total, it wasn't death, it wasn't murder, it was terrible, terrible slavery and dehumanization. And how long it has taken, in some ways, that community to recover from some of the disadvantages that they suffered and to liberate not just their bodies, but their minds and their cultures and their family life. And here we are, 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, V'nei Yisrael Yatzu B'yad Rama, and we're standing underneath Har Sinai, about to accept the most complicated religion known to man, called monotheism. And this is strategically prior. This is even prior. There are all sorts of questions to Moshe Rabbeinu. Who would have thought that slaves could ask these questions? Slaves barely surviving. Where am I getting my daily bread from? One foot in front of the other. How can I make it to the end of the day? How can I keep my family intact? And all of a sudden we're thinking about God and theodicy and spirituality and creation and afterlife and whatever they're thinking about whenever they're asking Moshe Rabbeinu. And not just that, but they're also growing, they're populating, and their families have remained intact. So Moshe is just bewildered. This doesn't make sense. Zoom out from October 7th and look at the last 90 years or 80 years of Jewish history. It's a great anthropological miracle. I'm not referring to the 2,000-year anthropological miracle, but the last 80 years. That a nation can pull itself out of such depths, out of such suffering. We lost 1/3 of our population and close to 1/2 of our collective wealth, and we had refugees wandering the earth. And not just reconstitute ourselves and build robust communities, which most of us come from, and achieve affluence and influence and build and construct, but also conduct this historical project of building a homeland in the face of international opposition and hostility in the wake of the Holocaust, collecting dialects from 52 different countries. If you just take a step back and you view the arc of Jewish history and our successes, it leaves you confused. It's different. We're not Hein Am Levadad Yishkon. We march to a different beat. We are not influenced by the typical trajectories and sign graphs that affect other nations. And unfortunately, as we know, when we sin phenomenally, incredulously. Weeks after Nasa v'Nishma, Eile Elohecha Yisrael and Egel Hazav, it defies imagination. But part of the challenge of living in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, the pendulum effect, when it swings so far to one end, sometimes it swings wildly. Sometimes both collectively and individually, it's hard to keep that pendulum from swinging. And we're people of great spirituality, and we're stubborn people. That's why we were chosen. Because the less stubborn people would not have been able to withstand the trials of history and the persecution of Jewish exile. So we're stubborn, and sometimes that stubbornness works against us, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu reminds us, and sometimes that stubbornness works for us. So Yeshaya looks at these people and says, you have the Beis HaMikdash, you have Just try to walk yourself back into the days of the Beis HaMikdash. We all walked into this room with our moral failures and our hypocrisies and our false narratives about ourselves. But if the Beis HaMikdash landed tomorrow, would you sin? If the Beis HaMikdash landed tomorrow, I think we'd all experience spiritual revival, spiritual inspiration. None of us would sin and exploit and curse. And how did it happen? And don't sugarcoat. Don't sugarcoat the past. We have a very, very dangerous tendency to look back at the past as if they were all righteous and we're all fallen. There were certain generations that were righteous, and there are certain generations that were fallen, and our generation is a righteous generation with the faith that we've demonstrated. And the people of that era fell headlong into Gilui Arayos and fell headlong into Avodah Zarah. There are crypts that have been discovered up north, and the crypts have little idols in them. So it wasn't a righteous generation. And it's hard to imagine how they fell so precipitously. And that's what Yeshaya sees and says, Eicha, this nation just defies logic, defies. And then Yirmiyah sees the suffering. And when we suffer miserably. The Romans, Yirmiyah of course did not see the Romans. The Romans conquered many, many cultures. And their secret was that to establish and expand their empire, they would not annihilate their enemies, but they would subjugate their enemies. So they'd march into the village, kill a few dozen men, rape a few dozen women, but then maintain the village because they required two elements to fuel their empire, coin and soldiers. So they would collect taxes and collect soldiers. And without those two resources, the empire couldn't expand. So Rome had no interest whatsoever in completely rooting out their enemies, except for one. There was one nation that they pursued maliciously and tenaciously. Their leaders, the executions were gory and grisly. Not one Jew could be left alive. Unfortunately, so much of Jewish history is cyclical and it repeats itself. The bodies of Beitar were left unburied for years and years, and that was such a collective trauma, as we are experiencing now, but imagine an entire city, that when they finally allowed those bodies of Beitar, the last stronghold, to fall, to be buried, Chazal added to Birchas HaMazon. Could you imagine the fourth bracha, Tov V'Ametiv? And what a bracha. We're so thankful to Hashem because thousands of dead bodies were finally buried. Life is that way. Life is a mixture of joy and sadness. And just because you're cloaked by sadness doesn't mean you must ignore the joy and the thank and the gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for whatever you're able to achieve, whatever you're able to scrape together. So the fact that Moshe, Yeshaya, and Yirmiyah all arrived at the same conclusion is not incidental. They were standing at different vantage points in history. Moshe at the apogee of Jewish history. Yeshaya, as Jewish history was tumbling down the mountain. And Yirmiyah, as we lay in the valley, exposed and lame, vulnerable and defeated. But this roller coaster of history is uncommon because we're the people of Hashem. Because we're chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the normal anthropological cycles that other countries endure and experience don't apply to our people. Jewish history is irrational. Jewish history is indescribable. And that's why they all use the term Eicha. Eicha would have been inquisitive. Eicha is, how could this happen? So Yirmiyah strategically chooses that term. First of all, he wants to ask. And by the way, don't take that first layer for granted. Yirmiyah teaches us, going back to that first layer, something crucial. I think it's very compelling for 2025. Part of faith is asking hard questions to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As long as those questions are posed with reverence, and as long as you know you probably won't get answers. Think of the last 2 years. If you believe that Hashem is Melech HaRachamim, and He's Melech HaMishpat, and He's Zocher HaBris, He's merciful, He's just, and He remembers the bris. How could you not ask the following three-letter question when you daven? Why? Why did October 7th happen? And don't reverse engineer, because we have so many military victories over our enemies and over Syria and over... That's offensive. Because Hashem has many algorithms to achieve those miracles. And don't ever reverse engineer suffering. The so many people have suffered just because the end game provides benefit. Just like you shouldn't look at the Holocaust. Well, we needed the Holocaust? Really? We need October 7th? Really? It's morally offensive and it's theologically bankrupt. So you ask why? Lama? Lama zanachta lenetzach. Hashavit kol etz leyaseh mishpat. Lama yerosa lama zeh. Eicha. Yirmiyah empowers us to ask those questions with his why. The next level of Eicha is the kina and the tochacha that Chazal speak about. The final level of Eicha is, it just doesn't make sense. And I throw my hands up, how to make sense of this? And the word Eicha actually has a cousin. There's another word in Jewish history that captures the mystery and the irrationality and the unfathomability of Jewish history. It's not Eicha, and it's not a 4-letter word, but it's a 3-letter word. And to appreciate that 3-letter word, let's visit Yirmiyah moments before he writes Eicha. I don't mean moments before a few minutes, but literally before he writes Eicha. The city has yet to be destroyed, but it's about to be destroyed. And he's walking through the city, and it's in flames. Close your eyes and imagine the movie. Flames shooting up from the huts, walls falling down, boulders being shot into the city, Castilian soldiers rampaging through the city, women running and screaming, people being speared in their hearts. You can imagine the scene. And that day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu charges Yirmiyah not with speaking with his tongue, but delivering a message for Jewish future with his behavior. What is Yirmiyah's assigned task of that day? Go buy some land from your uncle. Go buy some land in Yerushalayim from your uncle. And he's flabbergasted. And he anticipates Hashem response, and he says, I know I'm a Navi. I know that I can't understand you. But still, this is preposterous. This is completely off the reservation. So Yirmiyah says in source number 5, after I purchased, Hashem Elokim, line 2. And then he begins his ramble. You created the earth and the heaven, and you're the master of wisdom and the possessor of secrets. These are all psukim lifted from Eov. Basically, Yirmiyah is saying, I've already read Sefer Eov. I know that we can't understand you. That's the takeaway from Eov, Parak Lamed Zayin. Eov tries, he fails, and Hashem appears to him in a storm and says, how dare you arrogate the prospect to understand my ways. So I know that I can't understand you, Yirmiyah says. Gadol Eitzah, line number 3, V'rav Aliliyah, you're the master of wisdom, your eyes are open. But Hine, source number 5, line 5, the ramparts have been built, and the Kasdim have already controlled the city. You tell me, Hashem Elokim, some purchase land. It's ridiculous. I can't even get a lawyer. No one's selling it. They're giving it away. $1 for the land. And you want me to go through the motions. And Hashem delivers this 3-letter word to you. It's like a password to your Google account. The password to the Google account, Israel@gmail.com. I don't know if this is such a Google account. Whoever got that one is lucky. I would kill to have that. Israel@gmail.com. But the password to Jewish history@gmail.com is a 3-letter word. Hashem tells Yirmiyah, last line, Hinei, Ani, Hashem, Elokei, Kol Basar, source 5, Hamimeni Yipale Kol Davar. To you it seems baffling because you parse history in swaths of 100 years, 200 years, 500 years. I span eternity, Hashem says. Ki elef shanim beinecha ki yom esmo. Your 1,000 years is my hiccup. And you will return one day. And Jews will live in Yerushalayim one day. And the real estate market will be obscene in Jerusalem one day, forcing you all to live in Efrat, or at least come to the Shir in Efrat. Because you can't afford to maintain its office. One day people will live in Yerushalayim. And you are foreshadowing that future. Because history is a Pella. Pei, Lamed, Aleph. Jewish history is a Pella. Pei, Lamed, Aleph. It's a mystery. Eicha. It baffles you in imagination. One of my lesser desirable parts of my job is to conduct interviews for the yeshiva. If anyone wants the job, I'm happy to give it to you. It isn't elegant, it isn't pleasant. Everyone, I want to see not just how the boy reads Gemara and davens. I want to see who he is as a Jew. Is he a good Jew? Is he a Jewish identity? It's such a foundation of religion, something we overlook in today's world. We work at ritual, we work at mitzvahs, another Shulchan Aruch, but are we a good Yid? Are we a good Jew? So one of the questions I ask is, if you had a DeLorean, you get the reference, right? 80s? If you had a time machine, okay, and you had one setting, and you could set it to go back to one point in Jewish history, where would you go? So there are a million different answers to that question. They're all right. If he says, I'm going to the Yankee game, he's probably not accepted to yeshiva. But any other question, he's in, any other answer. So about 25 years ago, a boy looked at me and said, Rabbi, what would you choose? So firstly, when he wasn't looking, I put a big check next to him. Because I like kids that are a little bit irreverent. Because irreverence, a little bit of irreverence gets you far in life. You know, he has the moxie to ask that question. He's not terrified of his own shadow. He's standing up to the rabbi. If he stands up to the rabbi on the interview, he'll probably stand up to other pressures in life, and he's going places. I put a little check next to him. Today he's a big rabbi, so I won't say his name. So he asked me, where would I go? I said, I would like to go back to 1945 and walk out of Auschwitz. Why? What was the first thing that survivors did? They found someone from the shtetl, their cousin, their sister's friend, their aunt's daughter, something or other. Let's remarry, let's rebuild, let's bring new people into this world. And so 2020 hindsight lets us know that those children born in 46 and 48 and 49 would march in the fields of dreams and bring Geulah to our people. They'd be the pioneers of Jewish history, the finest generation of Jewish history, pioneering history. But they didn't know that. And I asked myself, what type of moral courage must it have taken them to just walk through the darkness and hold the line and act courageously and morally, just to do the right thing even when the world doesn't make sense? I'm addicted to moral courage. I love finding people who have moral courage, who do the right thing because it's right when no one's watching, regardless of any consequence, because you act in accordance with your principles and you stick to your guns, regardless of whatever calculus may or may not even fault. I met someone like that. His name was Rabbi, and I learned a lot from him. Stick to your principles, stick to your convictions, hold fast to your ideals. The world doesn't always accommodate them, but it doesn't take away the nobility of the position and the decision. I just want to feel their moral strength. I think a lot about the Holocaust when I think about Yirmiyah standing in Yerushalayim and wondering. I said, just trust me. Trust me. Build, buy, Jewish history cycles in on itself. If I had a second. Okay, thank you. Okay. If I, Vatered Playim, it's a pasuk in Eicha. So if I had a second DeLorean, I want to go back to 1960 to Las Vegas. Why do I want to go back to 1960 to Las Vegas? I'd land somewhere on the strip, find the quickest bookie that I can. I want to place a bet, 1960 Las Vegas. Which country is going to last longer? The Soviet Union? Or some fledgling little Jewish state in the middle of the Mideast maniacal murders? Where's it going to last longer? What type of odds do you think I get? 1,000 to 1? 10,000 to 1? Soviet Union, 69 years. We're going on 78. So I would have won that bet. Make a lot of money. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivers that second message. Moshe, Yeshaya, Yirmiyah understood it. Yirmiyah understood it probably before he said Eicha, when Hashem told him, Hamimeni Yipolei Kol Davar, which it illustrated to him the irrationality, unknowability of Jewish history, and that's why he began his Sefer Eicha. But Yirmiyah grasped this in the first Beis HaMikdash. His spiritual descendant grasped it when he walked amongst the ruins of the second Beis HaMikdash. And with this we'll end. And this is Rabbi Akiva. But pay attention, because we're going to read that Gemara that we know too well because we don't know the details. You know the story. They're all walking amongst the ruins. They see rats and vermin. They all start crying. Akiva starts laughing. Why is he laughing? And Akiva is a consummate outsider because he comes to it later in life, and that's why he has a fresh set of eyes. It's always important to see things with a fresh set of eyes, not just the common way that you've been trained to see things, but the reverse angle. Why does Rabbi Akiva see redemption when they all see suffering? Because he sees a pasuk in Yeshaya, source 3. Yeshaya summons two prophets, literally, symbolically. V'a'idali, source number 3. Eidim ne'amanim, es Uriah ha-kohen v'es Zechariah ben Yevorachia. Uriah speaks about, it's quoted in Micha, speaks about the destruction of the Mikdash. I'm reading it from Micha, Lachein biglalchem, source number 4. Tzion Sadeh Techaresh V'Yishalayim Mayen Tiyeh V'Har Habayit Livamot Ya'ar. So Uriah speaks of the destruction. Of course, Zechariah, as we'll soon see, speaks of the redemption. And since Yeshaya, having nothing to do with Uriah and Zechariah, but Yeshaya, some third-party bystander, loops the destruction prophecy of Uriah and the redemption prophecy of Zechariah into the same pasuk, so when you witness the fulfillment of Uriah's destruction prophecy, you can anticipate the fulfillment of Zechariah's redemption prophecy. Is that all simply because Uriah's destruction prophecy and Zechariah's redemption prophecy appear in the same pasuk? No. Uriah and Zechariah saw the same thing from different angles. Uriah saw the Beis HaMikdash razed, demolished, and salted. As I said before, Rome had no interest in renaming any other empire or annihilating any other empire except for one. He saw not only the defeat of the Jewish people, but Tzion Sadeh Techaresh. The plowing, the razing, the salting, the annihilation, which leads it to, sorry, my phone just went off, just make sure I'm still recording, which leads to it becoming a graveyard where rats are scampering around. Why did this happen? No other nation was subjected to such devastation, to such destruction. Uriah is looking through Jewish history through those same lenses. This is irrational. This is incomprehensible. No other nation is suffering this miserably. He sees what Yirmiyah basically sees in Yerushalayim. And Rabbi Akiva sees it hundreds of years later. What does Zechariah see? What's Zechariah's redemptive vision? And what words does he use? And we'll end with this, source number 7. Kol Amar Hashem Tzavakos. Od Yeshvu, we all know this. Zakenim v'zakenos b'rechavos Yushalayim. Men and women of elderly advanced age will stroll. The streets will be filled by children frolicking. What is so apocalyptic about these visions? Zechariah is an apocalyptic Navi. People in Norway stroll through the city streets of Oslo. People in Italy stroll through the city streets of Rome. Children frolic in Moscow. Children frolic in Tokyo. What is so apocalyptic about men and women walking on canes in soft summer evenings and children frolicking on monkey bars? The answer is what's normal in Tokyo, Moscow, what's normal in Oslo and London is apocalyptic in Yerushalayim. And it's apocalyptic for Jews. And we still haven't achieved it because Jews are still not free to stroll through the streets of Yerushalayim or the streets of Kiryat Shimon or the streets of Sderot and Ofakim. And kids are not frolicking on monkey bars or hiding in bomb shelters. Rav Amital, my Rebbe, told me that when he escaped the Holocaust and he lived in Givat Mordechai and he attended the yeshiva of Hebron, he would walk every day to the yeshiva and stand by the playground transfixed, watching little children play and crying for hours. Because those same eyes that now witnessed the prophecies of Zechariah had witnessed little Jewish children being lined up on stony walls in Europe being shot dead at point-blank range. And now he was privileged to see, and to see these nevuos. And how does Zechariah conclude his nevuah of redemption? This is one of the biggest hyperboles in all of Tanakh. Kol Amar Hashem Tzivakos, source number 7. Ki yipalei. That's that word again. Ki yipalei be'enei sheres hamazeh. Those that are privileged to live out the end of history will be shocked. Ki yipalei. Gam be'ena yipalei no Hashem. I'll also be shocked. Here's your hyperbole. Hashem is not shocked. It's just a matter of speech to show how shocking it is. So it's not just that the destruction nevuah and the redemption nevuah happened to be joined in one pasuk in Yeshaya, and that tipped off Rabbi Akiva. Well, since they appear incidentally in the same pasuk of Yeshaya, Uriah's nevuah about Churban and Zechariah's nevuah about Geula, then if the Churban nevuah is coming true because I see the rats, then the Geula should come true. Rabbi Akiva saw into the life of things. No, these two prophecies are speaking the same message. Jewish history is unfathomable. It's unknowable. It's mysterious. It's a pella. It's a pella that we sink so low that our Makom HaMikdash isn't just captured, but is devastated and razed and salted. It's a pella. And if Jewish history is a pella at its nadir, it will be a pella as it rises mercurially from its ashes. And it can happen overnight. So Rabbi Akiva twinned the two nevuos not only because they're juxtaposed in some pasuk in Yeshaya. Yeshaya juxtaposed them because they're two sides of the same coin, and that coin is the irrationality of Jewish history. And that's what Eicha means. And when we begin our experience Eicha, it's almost as if Tisha B'Av is a three-legged table. It's suffering the Churban Beis HaMikdash. It's suffering the tragedy of Galus. But it's also pondering the mysteries of Jewish history. Because Galus is not incidental to Jewish history. It could have been avoided, but once it occurred, it transformed Jewish history. And to a degree, I want to say it's a triumph of history, but the way in which we navigated Galus, and we're slowly pulling ourselves out of that tunnel into the next room of history, is a triumph. So allow yourself a little bit of a smile on Tisha B'Av, because Rabbi Akiva smiled on Tisha B'Av. And living in Israel and witnessing the miracles, if you don't smile on Tisha B'Av, I wonder if you've absorbed that third leg. We suffered the Churban, we suffered Galus, but we are redeeming Jewish history. And Akiva Nichamtanu. Walk in the footsteps of Rabbi Akiva. And the Shabir Alas Tisha B'Av, Be'ezus Hashem. We should know no more tragedy for our people.